Pramit Jhaveri, thanks very much for joining us here on the ET interview. Looking at the state of the economy, are you feeling that the next 2 years are going to be really hard for corporations and banks, or are you optimistic that this is really the bottom?
You know, Shaili, I think given where we find ourselves as an economy, I mean, obviously it's a challenging time, but then when you look at us where we are relative to the rest of the world and the opportunities that potentially present themselves for corporate India and obviously for the financial services industry and for institutions like ourselves, I think there is a little bit of a case of glass half full versus a glass half empty. And I think I belong to the glass half full category. So I think there are challenges and there are certainly headwinds, but we feel cautiously optimistic.
What is that glass full, half full made up of? I mean, what are the various elements that are making you optimistic?
Well, I think if you step back, I think it is fair to say that first of all, over the last 1 year, India as a country has probably lost an opportunity that was very much there for the taking. I think most of it right now looks like it's consumption-led. And if you look at the drivers of that consumption-led growth, which are really the drivers of businesses like ours,
right,
I think that is really the glass half full. And I also do believe that if certain, important and key decisions can get made over the next, in the foreseeable future, then there is an opportunity for this country to come back. I mean, at the end of the day, foreign capital is usually a great indicator.
Right.
I think foreign capital usually looks for two things. Foreign capital looks for an opportunity or an avenue for growth, and foreign capital looks for an environment and a positive sentiment. So
okay.
I think the first one is there, the second
exactly.
one is a question mark, but I do believe that we have the opportunity to fix that.
Let's pick up that consumption story. How long can we go on saying that we are a market of 1.2 billion people and therefore we are just the great market? Something has to snap, because the point too that you mentioned, there are decisions that have to aid that consumption story.
We're not sitting here and saying India is the next best thing and India is a great thing. At the end of the day, there are other alternatives, albeit in a world that is a very difficult place right now. But I do believe that even given where we are, if certain decisions can be made over the, as I said, foreseeable future, and we all accept that there has been an absence of that decision making over the last 12 or 18 months, which is why we find ourselves where we are. But I do believe that if those decisions can be made, sentiment is something that we have seen in the past changes pretty quickly.
That's right. But, are we at the bottom? We're looking at a 5-point-something% growth, with brokerages after brokerages coming and saying that the story for India has been considerably lowered from a growth standpoint. So if these decisions that you're banking on don't get taken, then is it fair for corporate India and banks and foreign investors to be pessimistic?
So first of all, I don't think you make a business case or you don't make judgments based on banking on any decisions, right? At the end of the day, as I said earlier, we are cautiously optimistic. I think this 5.3 number only came out yesterday, so we're obviously sitting very close on that. And if you looked at the reactions today, you'll find a spectrum of reactions from a gasping elephant to the clarion call to is this a missed opportunity, are we down and out, comparisons to 1991, etc.
Not completely baseless, though.
Well, as I said, I think I'm somewhere in the middle of the pack. And when you're cautiously optimistic, you like to believe that we're not down and out. There are obviously things that are going to need to be done, right? It's not going to happen on its own.
Sure.
There is no magic wand or a switch that can be turned off, because if there was, for heaven's sake, it would have been waved. So I think it's a difficult time. The world is going through a difficult phase. India is no longer completely insular from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think there are things that are within our reach. They will be politically difficult. There are political challenges. That is the construct that we live in today. And one shouldn't kind of run away from that. So there are challenges, but hopefully some of them can be addressed, and we'll move on. Corporate India is going through a quiet period or a consolidation period, and obviously we will kind of have the consequences of that. But as I said, this is not specific to India. Given where we find ourselves today with the rupee, it's absolutely a cause for concern, and it's really driven by the current account deficit, and it's driven by the lack of flows into India.
Reliance let you roam seamlessly across 333 towns. Be Blue, it's simply better. Reliance. Come and experience Advantage Karnataka at the Global Investors Meet 2012 on June 7th and 8th at Bangalore, India.
Samsung Galaxy S3. Designed for humans.
Without trying to use that whole cliche of policy paralysis, I'd like to know from you, Pramit Jhaveri, that today, will FDI in retail or insurance and banking reforms really be a game changer for an economy like ours, or are we just depending far too much for a signal to come from these decisions that will potentially change the future of India? Does it really look that simplistic?
I don't think India is a place where you have game-changing transformational reform. I think India is a country that has benefited from incremental reform. And I think incremental reform, small steps, really because of the political environment that we've had in this country for the last 20 years. And if you continue to subscribe to the philosophy that incremental reform will take place, and you're right that it hasn't in the last 1.5 years, but I think therefore looking forward, I personally don't advocate or don't believe that there is going to be this transformational game-changing reform. Yeah. But I do think that small steps, like we've done in the past, but steps that actually manifest, right, that we are in a decision-making mode and we are serious about this, can actually start moving the needle back to where we want it to be.
So like you said, the sentiment in India can often change very quickly. In the short term, would a potential rate cut be that game-changing sentiment mover?
Monetary policy, interest rates, inflation are very, very complex subjects. And, so much has been said and written over the last 18 months. As we've been through the increasing interest rate cycle. So it's not clear to me that we are yet at a place, or it is clear that we can simply go ahead and continue to drop rates, because there's a number of factors that need to be taken into consideration. But I think there is one section of the market that does believe that could be one element. But I think it's more than monetary policy, right? Because it's more, I think, a question of kind of decisiveness and taking some small decisions at a policy level, and then maybe within the right political environment, even something that could be transformational, like the introduction of GST,
which is only seeing postponement so far, and that could be a sentiment mover. That said, 200 years of Citi and several years to go ahead. How do you see Citi changing its approach towards a market like India, because it remains very, very volatile in the current state?
I think first of all, the emerging markets are very much at the heart of Citi's long-term strategy at this point. By definition, therefore, India will be at the forefront of our growth in the context of emerging markets. And I think if you look at the last 5 or 6 years, where the world has been a volatile place, the industry has been a very volatile place, our financial services industry, and quite frankly, Citi has been through, obviously, its own share of troubles. I would like to believe that in this market we have behaved very consistently. We have had a long-term approach, and quite frankly, we're today in a position to reap the benefits of that long-term approach, and we have not behaved in a knee-jerk fashion. So I see no reason why, notwithstanding the short-term or medium-term macro problems that this country or economy is facing, that we're going to change our response.
Has it been harder to kickstart the retail story once again for Citi?
Well, I think first of all, to be fair, when you look at our business in India, right, we have a corporate business and a retail business. I think on the retail side, since you bring that up, I think a lot of what we've had to do is a consequence of our own problems. I think that a lot of what we've had to do and we've chosen to do has been because of our legacy problems. So we've had to fix a number of things, we've had to digest the problems, and I like to believe done a lot of that successfully. So we're very much back in what you would describe as a growth mode.
What do you call these as problems that you might have fixed?
Well, listen, this was not specific to Citi in India. This was a problem that confronted what the industry actually, forced itself into in many ways, which is 6-7 years ago, there was this massive growth on the retail or consumer finance side. And, we were very much one of the 5 or 6 players who chose to participate in that growth in a fairly, insensible manner. And we faced the consequences of that, which were both financial and otherwise. And where we found ourselves 4 or 5 years later was with a, fairly large-sized, balance sheet that was not in good shape. So you obviously have to fix that. You've got to change the culture in an organization. You have to change a large organization from a consolidation, hunkered down mode into a growth mode.
Right.
You have to convince a large organization that we have the ability to now grow sensibly, responsibly, and profitably. So all of that takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of pain. Pain needs to digest to the system. And I think we've done that. We've spent, a couple of years doing that. We've cleaned the place up. And right now we feel pretty good about our retail business. And I would, hope that over the next 2 or 3 years, we will see the growth coming back.
Is that where you probably want to spend more energies today, given that investment banking and corporate banking might take a bit of a backseat given investment cycle slowdowns and the sort of lack of desire of corporations to go out there in an aggressive way?
It's going through a bit of a quiet period, right? Investment banking. I mean, corporate India is going through a quiet period or a consolidation period, and obviously we will kind of have the consequences of that. But as I said, this is not specific to India. I mean, if you look at where we are, global markets and market conditions will drive corporate behavior. Only in the last 96 hours, we've seen 3 or 4 very large kind of marquee equity offerings out of North Asia pulled. So we're not alone in this. I think it's just a question of, wanting to be and being as big and being there for what our clients want to do. And that's really whether it's a corporate client or a household or a small business or an individual. And I think when you look at that entire spectrum, it's a balanced model, and I think we're very well positioned.
No, I'm sure everyone's sort of aiming to strike a balance, but the fact is the past 5 years we've seen that investment banking has been a huge driver at Citi. Do you think the next 5 years we will probably see retail take charge and investment banking not be the higher of the ratios?
Well, I think first of all, investment banking just tends to be the most prominent, right? Which doesn't necessarily make it the biggest driver when you look at, the dollars and the cents and the percentages. So it is the most prominent because it occupies essentially, the top end of the pyramid.
What's your sense when you meet some of these CEOs and promoters? Do they want to use their money to now spend overseas rather than do that in domestic assets?
Well, you know what? The world is a very complicated and difficult place right now. And India, as we've been saying, has its own share of challenges. So again, I think it's very difficult to make a generalization. I think you find, some pockets where people are saying we're challenged by what's going on in India, so we want to look overseas. There are some, that say, no, we will continue to be focused on India. But it's not as straightforward, right? Because even if you're challenged with what's going on in India, it is not conclusive or crystal that
right.
The rest of the world doesn't have its problems.
Sure, but we talked about how consumption is a big theme going forward. So do you see that M&A activity is also sort of getting in that direction, as opposed to going in for large assets on, in terms of resources, manufacturing and so on, because it takes longer to absorb them and even longer to turn them around?
Right, so I think it's both sector specific and it's, company specific. We've kind of focused on M&A in the context of Indian companies going outside. I think one of the things that is very significant right now for us, for India,